I stood frozen in the middle of the Metropolitan Foundation gala, my champagne glass trembling in my hand as my stepmother's venomous words cut through the elegant music like a knife. "Look who crawled out of the gutter." Eleanor Sterling hissed loud enough for nearby guests to turn and stare. The woman who raised me, or rather, the woman who made my childhood a living hell, stood before me in her designer gown with that same contemptuous sneer I remembered from all those years ago. But this time, I wasn't the broken 18-year-old girl she'd thrown out onto the street with nothing but a backpack and a heart full of shattered dreams. Before I could even process what was happening, my stepsister, Sarah, lunged forward and grabbed my wrist with surprising force. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my skin as she pulled me close, her breath hot against my ear. "You don't belong here, you pathetic little parasite," she spat. "Remember what happened last time you tried to be somebody? We crushed you then. And we'll crush you now." She shoved me backward, and I stumbled in my heels, barely catching myself on a nearby pillar. The humiliation washed over me in waves, and for a moment I was 18 again, standing in the pouring rain outside the Sterling mansion, watching the door slam in my face. My father, Dr. Arthur Sterling, approached with his signature look of cold disappointment. "Celeste, I think it's time for you to leave before you embarrass yourself further," he said in that clinical tone. He'd perfected over 30 years of being a surgeon. "You have nothing. You are nothing. Just like you've always been. A high school education doesn't make you worthy of a place like this." The people around us were starting to whisper, their eyes darting between my family and me, hungry for drama at this prestigious event. But then something miraculous happened. A warm, strong hand slid around my waist, and I felt the solid presence of my husband Ethan Thorne beside me. "What seems to be the problem here, darling?" His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge of steel. He looked directly at Arthur and Eleanor, his gray eyes cold as winter frost. "I'm Ethan Thorne, CEO of Thorne Industries, and this is my wife, Celeste Vance, Chief Executive Officer of Quantum Analytics. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's only the fastest-growing data analytics firm on the East Coast." The color drained from Eleanor's face. Arthur's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Sarah let out a shriek that turned every head in the ballroom. "That's impossible," she screamed. "She's nothing. She's a nobody. She doesn't even have a college degree." Sarah tried to pull her fiancé Julian Blackwood away from the scene, but he stood rooted to the spot, staring at me with an expression of dawning recognition and something that looked almost like regret. I straightened my spine, feeling the power of everything I'd built over the past decade flowing through me. I looked my father dead in the eye and said in a voice that didn't waver, "I don't know who you people think you are, but you've made a grave mistake tonight. You've shown your true colors in front of everyone who matters in this city. I suggest you leave before you humiliate yourselves further." Then I turned on my heel, my hand firmly clasped in Ethan's, and walked away from them without looking back, leaving them standing there in their designer clothes and designer lies, completely exposed. But before you hear the rest of this incredible story of how I went from being thrown away like garbage to becoming one of the most successful businesswomen in New York, and how my toxic family got exactly what they deserved, please hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment below telling me if you've ever had to cut off toxic family members. Your support means everything. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to where this whole nightmare started. I was born Celeste Marie Robinson, and for the first 8 years of my life, I thought I was the luckiest girl in the world. My biological mother had passed away when I was just a baby, but I had my father, my maternal grandparents who adored me, and a childhood filled with love, books, and dreams of becoming a doctor just like my dad. My grandparents, Thomas and Margaret Robinson, were successful business owners who'd built their wealth from nothing. They saw how brilliant and curious I was, and they wanted to make sure I'd always have opportunities in life. When I was 7, my grandfather called me into his study, a room that smelled of leather and pipe tobacco and old books. He sat me on his lap and told me something I wouldn't fully understand until much later. "Celeste, my darling girl, your grandmother and I have set up something special for you. It's called a trust fund, and it has $150,000 in it. That money is for your education, for college, For graduate school if you want it. No one can touch it except for educational purposes. And when you turn 18, you'll have access to it. Promise me you'll use it to become everything you're meant to be. I promised him with all the seriousness a 7-year-old could muster, not knowing that within a year, my entire world would collapse. When I was 8, my father married Eleanor Whitmore, a woman who seemed charming and sophisticated on the surface. She came with a daughter my age named Sarah. And at first, I was excited to have a sister. But the mask didn't stay on for long. Within months of the wedding, I noticed how Eleanor would smile sweetly at my father and then turn cold, calculating eyes on me the moment he left the room. Sarah was worse. She was spoiled, manipulative, and cruel in ways that children can be when they know exactly how to hurt someone without leaving visible marks. My grandparents saw through Eleanor immediately. They tried to warn my father, but he was blinded by whatever spell she'd cast over him. When I was 9, my grandmother pulled me aside after a particularly awful family dinner, where Eleanor had subtly criticized everything about me from my table manners to my clothes. She pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. "This is the information about your trust fund. Sweetheart, keep it safe. Don't tell Eleanor or Sarah about it. It's yours, and no one else's." I tucked that paper into my favorite book and tried to be the perfect daughter, the perfect stepdaughter, the perfect sister, hoping that if I was good enough, things would get better. They didn't get better. They got so much worse. When I was 10, my beloved grandfather passed away, suddenly from a heart attack. At his funeral, I sobbed in my grandmother's arms while Eleanor stood off to the side with a strange expression on her face that I couldn't quite read. Then, just 6 months later, my grandmother followed him. The doctors said it was a stroke, but I always believed she died of a broken heart. I was 11 years old, orphaned except for my father, and completely at the mercy of Eleanor Sterling. The change was immediate and brutal. Eleanor didn't even wait until after the funeral reception to start treating me like hired help. She assigned me a tiny room in the attic, moving me out of my comfortable bedroom, which was immediately redecorated for Sarah's walk-in closet. I was given a list of chores that grew longer every week. Cook breakfast, clean the bathrooms, do the laundry, tend the garden, polish the silver. Meanwhile, Sarah did absolutely nothing except preen in front of mirrors and plan her social calendar. My father saw all of this happening, and he did nothing. Absolutely nothing. When I tried to talk to him about how Eleanor and Sarah treated me, he would sigh and say, "Celeste, Eleanor is just trying to teach you responsibility and work ethic. You're too sensitive. Besides, I work 80 hours a week at the hospital. I can't be involved in every little household dispute." It was as if the loving father I'd known had been replaced by this distant, dismissive stranger who cared more about keeping his new wife happy than protecting his own daughter. School became my only refuge. I threw myself into my studies with desperate intensity. I joined every club, volunteered for every project, stayed late at the library every single day. My teachers noticed my potential and encouraged me, telling me I could get a full scholarship to a prestigious university if I kept up my grades. That dream of becoming a doctor that my grandfather had nurtured, it became my lifeline. I told myself that if I could just survive until graduation, if I could just make it to 18, I could access my trust fund and escape. But Eleanor Sterling wasn't stupid, and she was far more cunning than I ever gave her credit for. When I was 15, she started a campaign that I didn't even recognize until it was too late. She began planting seeds of doubt about my capabilities in my father's mind. "Arthur, I'm worried about Celeste," she would say over dinner while I was serving them their food like a maid. She seemed so stressed, so overwhelmed with her studies. Maybe she's just not cut out for the academic track. Maybe she should consider a trade school or community college, something more realistic for her abilities. My father, who had once been so proud of my straight-A's, started questioning whether I was pushing myself too hard. Maybe Eleanor is right, he said one night when I asked him to sign a permission slip for an advanced placement exam. "You don't want to burn yourself out, Celeste. Not everyone is meant for that kind of pressure." I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet, but I didn't understand what was happening. I just worked harder, studied longer, tried to prove that I was worthy. Then came my 16th birthday. A day that should have been special but instead became another chapter in my growing nightmare. Eleanor threw a massive Sweet 16 party for Sarah, who was born just 2 months after me. The house was decorated like a palace. There was a DJ, a Qatar dinner, designer gift bags for all 100 guests, and Sarah wore a custom couture dress that cost more than most people's cars. My birthday, which fell on a Tuesday, passed without acknowledgement. No cake, no card, no gift. When I quietly mentioned it to my father 2 days later, he looked genuinely confused. "Oh, was that this week? I'm sorry. Sweetheart, work has been so busy. We'll do something special next year. I promise?" That promise was as empty as all the others. Junior year of high school was when things escalated to a level I could never have imagined. Sarah, who had always been jealous of my academic success, decided she wanted to be valedictorian. The problem was that despite having every advantage, tutors, no chores, unlimited free time, she just wasn't smart enough to compete with me. Her grades were decent, solid B's with the occasional A-, but nowhere near my 0 gigapascals in advanced coursework. So Eleanor hatched a plan. She started volunteering at the school, becoming heavily involved in the PTA, making substantial donations to various programs. She befriended my guidance counselor, took the principal out to expensive lunches, and slowly, insidiously began lobbying for Sarah to receive opportunities that should have gone to more qualified students. When I was nominated for a prestigious science scholarship that included a summer program at MIT, Eleanor made sure that nomination was quietly redirected to Sarah. When I applied to be student body president, Eleanor convinced the faculty advisor that it would be more equitable to have co-presidents, forcing me to share the position with Sarah even though I'd won the election outright. The worst part was that Sarah acted like she deserved all of it. She would strut through the school hallways, flipping her highlighted hair, talking about her achievements to anyone who would listen. She created an elaborate fiction about her life, posting constantly on social media about her volunteer work, her leadership roles, her academic excellence, all of it built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. Meanwhile, I was working 3 part-time jobs trying to save money for college expenses beyond tuition. Since I still believed I would have my trust fund for school itself, during my senior year, everything came to a head, in the most devastating way possible. It was March, and college acceptance letters were arriving. I'd applied to 15 schools, including several Ivy League universities, all with the expectation that my trust fund would cover my education. I was accepted to 12 of them, including Cornell and the University of Pennsylvania, with partial academic scholarships that when combined with my trust fund would make attendance possible. I was over the moon. This was it. This was my ticket out. In just 5 months, I would be 18. I would have access to my money, and I would be free. Then Eleanor struck. She called me into the dining room on a Saturday afternoon when my father was at the hospital dealing with an emergency surgery. "Sight down, Celeste," she said in that saccharine voice that always preceded something awful. "We need to have a serious conversation about your future." Sierra sat beside her, wearing a smirk that made my stomach drop. Eleanor slid a stack of papers across the polished mahogany table. "These are the enrollment forms for Hudson Valley Community College," she announced. "You'll be starting there in the fall. You can live at home, continue your chores, and work toward an associate's degree. It's a much more appropriate path for someone of your background and abilities." I stared at her in disbelief. "What are you talking about? I've been accepted to Cornell. I'm going to be a doctor. I have my trust fund." That's when Eleanor's smile turned truly vicious. "About that trust fund, dear. You see, your father is the trustee, and we've determined that community college is sufficient for your educational needs. The remainder of the money has been reallocated to cover some family expenses that have come up. Medical malpractice insurance, legal fees, things you wouldn't understand. The important thing is that you be grateful for the opportunity to attend community college at all. Many people don't even get that chance." The room started spinning. I felt like I was falling down a deep well. "That money is mine," I whispered. "My grandparents left it specifically for my education, for a 4-year university, for medical school. You can't just take it." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, examining her manicured nails. Your father can, and he has. The trust gives him full discretion over disbursements, and he's made his decision. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with him when he gets home. Though I wouldn't recommend it. He's very stressed with work. And the last thing he needs is his ungrateful daughter throwing a tantrum about money. I did wait up for my father that night. He didn't get home until almost midnight. Exhausted and irritable. When I tried to talk to him about the trust fund, he cut me off with an impatience I'd never heard from him before. Celeste. Eleanor has explained the situation to me. Community college is a perfectly good option. You're being dramatic and entitled. I have a board meeting at 6 a.m., so this conversation is over. Go to bed. That was the moment I realized with horrifying clarity that my father had completely chosen Eleanor and Sarah over me. Whatever love he'd once had for me had been eroded away by years of Eleanor's poison, but I refused to give up. I spent the next week frantically researching my options. I called the law firm that had set up the trust fund, only to be told that without money for legal representation, there was nothing they could do for me. I reached out to my school counselor, who sympathetically told me that family financial decisions were out of her jurisdiction. I even contacted my mother's old friends. People I barely remembered. But no one was willing to get involved in a family dispute. I was 17 years old, and I was completely trapped. 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, I made one last desperate attempt. I had been accepted to the University of Pennsylvania with a half scholarship, and I'd learned that if I could demonstrate financial independence and work full-time while taking classes part-time, I could make it work. It would take me longer to graduate, but I could do it. I could still become a doctor. I just needed my father to refuse to claim me as a dependent on his taxes so I could qualify for additional financial aid. I approached him in his study, armed with printouts and spreadsheets and a carefully rehearsed speech. "Dad, please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just help me with this one thing. Let me be independent. Let me go to Penn and build my own life. I'll never ask you for anything else again." He didn't even look up from the medical journal he was reading. Absolutely not. It would complicate our tax situation, and frankly, Celeste, I'm tired of your constant demands. You have a perfectly good option with community college. If you don't want to take it, that's your choice. But don't expect me to subsidize your stubbornness. That night, I lay in my attic bedroom and stared at the ceiling until dawn, processing the brutal reality of my situation. My father didn't love me. Eleanor had won. Sarah would get everything she wanted, including wearing a custom gown to her senior prom that cost $3,000. Exactly the price tag that had been attached to part of my trust fund disbursement I'd discovered in documents I'd found in my father's office. My money, my future, my dreams, all of it had been stolen to fund Sarah's princess fantasy life. My 18th birthday came on a Tuesday in April. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement, nothing. That evening, after finishing my chores, I went to my room and made a decision. If I couldn't go to my dream school, if I couldn't become a doctor right away, I could at least get out of this house. I had saved almost $4,000 from my part-time jobs over the past 2 years. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a room somewhere and start over. I would take a gap year, work full-time, save money, and reapply to schools the following year as an independent student. It would be harder. It would take longer, but I would do it on my own terms. The next morning, I waited until Eleanor and Sarah left for a spa day, and my father headed to the hospital. Then I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Before leaving, I decided to take one thing that belonged to me. A photo album my grandmother had made chronicling my childhood, filled with pictures of my mother, my grandparents, and happier times. I found it in the basement storage room. But while I was searching, I discovered something else. A box labeled Celeste Trust Documents that had been shoved behind old Christmas decorations. Inside were all the original trust papers, the will my grandparents had written, and detailed statements showing every disbursement from my fund. As I read through them with shaking hands, the full scope of the betrayal became clear. $150,000 had been allocated for my education. Over the past 3 years, my father and Eleanor had systematically drained it, $45,000 had gone to Sarah's private SAT tutoring and college application consultants. $30,000 had been used for that obscene Sweet 16 party. $25,000 had paid for Sarah's senior year wardrobe and prom dress. Another $30,000 had gone towards settling several medical malpractice lawsuits against my father that I'd never even known about. The remaining money had been parceled out in smaller amounts for luxury vacations, jewelry, and what was labeled as miscellaneous family expenses. I stood in that basement with tears streaming down my face, clutching evidence of the most profound betrayal imaginable. My grandparents had died believing they'd secured my future, and their own son had stolen it to support his new family's lavish lifestyle. I carefully photographed every single document with my phone, uploaded them to a cloud storage account, and put the originals back exactly where I'd found them. Then I walked out of that house with my suitcases and never looked back. The next 2 years were the hardest of my life, but also the most transformative. I moved into a tiny room in a shared apartment in Queens with 3 other girls. I worked 2 full-time jobs, one as a breakfast waitress and another as an evening receptionist at a dental office. I slept 4 hours a night and saved every penny that didn't go toward rent and food. I taught myself to code by watching free YouTube tutorials at the public library. I learned about data analytics, business management, and financial systems through online courses and sheer determination. During that time, my father called me exactly twice. The first time was 3 months after I'd left, and the conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. "Celeste, you need to come home and apologize to Eleanor for the way you left. She's very upset, and your behavior was unacceptable." When I asked if he felt any remorse for stealing my inheritance, he hung up on me. The second call came a year later. On Christmas Eve, he was drunk, which was unusual for him, and he rambled about how disappointed he was that I'd thrown away my potential. I listened in silence, and then gently told him that I hoped he had a good holiday, and that I was doing just fine without him. He never called again. By the time I was 20, I'd saved $30,000 and had built a portfolio of freelance data analysis projects. I created my first real business plan for a company that would help small and medium-sized businesses optimize their operations through data analytics. I called it Quantum Analytics, a name that felt powerful and forward-looking. I applied for a small business loan, got rejected by 11 banks, and finally found an angel investor who believed in my vision. Maria Gonzalez was a self-made entrepreneur who'd built her own tech company from nothing, and she saw something in me. That hunger, that refusal to quit, that she recognized in herself. With Maria's investment and mentorship, Quantum Analytics slowly began to grow. I worked 16-hour days, taking on any client who would give me a chance, delivering results that exceeded expectations, and building a reputation for excellence. By 22, I had 3 employees and had moved the company out of my apartment and into a real office space. By 24, we'd landed our first major corporate client, and our revenue jumped from 6 figures to 7. That was also the year I met Ethan Thorne. He was 35, a self-made billionaire who'd built Thorne Industries into a powerhouse of innovation across multiple sectors. We met at a tech conference where I was giving a presentation on predictive analytics. After my talk, he approached me with a business card and a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "That was brilliant," he said simply. "I'd like to discuss a potential partnership. Have dinner with me tomorrow." Dinner turned into a 3-hour conversation where we talked about everything from algorithm optimization to childhood dreams to the books that had shaped us. Ethan had also come from nothing, had also been underestimated and dismissed, and had also built his empire through pure determination and brilliance. We understood each other in a way I'd never experienced with anyone else. 3 months later, he proposed. 6 months after that, we were married in a simple ceremony with just a handful of close friends and Maria as my maid of honor. Ethan didn't just become my husband. He became my partner in every sense of the word. He invested in Quantum Analytics, connected me with his network, and encouraged me to dream even bigger. With his support, we expanded rapidly. I hired top talent, acquired smaller competitors, and positioned us as the premier data analytics firm for Fortune 500 companies. By the time I was 28, Quantum Analytics was valued at over $50 million, and I personally was worth more than my father had made in his entire career as a surgeon. During all those years of building my company and my life, I never reached out to my father or Eleanor or Sarah. I changed my phone number, moved to a different part of the city, and essentially became a ghost to them. I didn't want their apologies, and I certainly didn't want to rub my success in their faces. I just wanted to move forward and create a life that honored the memory of my grandparents and the dreams they'd had for me. But fate had other plans. And that's how I found myself at the Metropolitan Foundation Gala that Friday night in November, face to face with the people who'd tried to destroy me, watching their world crumble as they realized exactly who I'd become. After Ethan's powerful introduction and my cold dismissal, we spent the rest of the evening networking and pointedly ignoring the Sterling family, who huddled in a corner looking shell-shocked. What I didn't know that night was that things were about to get much worse for them, and much better for me. The morning after the gala, my phone started buzzing before 7 a.m. The first text was from Eleanor, sent at 3 a.m. "We need to talk. This is ridiculous. You're still our daughter." I deleted it without responding. Then came a text from Sarah at 6:30. "How dare you humiliate us like that? You're still the same pathetic loser you always were, just with a rich husband." That one made me laugh out loud. But it was the voicemail from my father that really caught my attention. "Celeste, this is your father. Last night was unacceptable. We raised you better than that. I expect you to call me back immediately and apologize to Eleanor and Sarah. Furthermore, it's come to my attention that you've done quite well for yourself, and I think it's time we discussed your financial obligations to your family. Call me." The audacity was breathtaking. I was still processing these messages when Ethan came into our bedroom with his iPad and a grim expression. "Darling, you need to see this." He showed me a gossip website that featured a photo of me at the gala with a headline that read, "Tech CEO's dark secret quantum analytics Celeste Vance accused of abandoning elderly parents." The article, clearly fed information by Eleanor, painted a picture of me as an ungrateful daughter who'd achieved success and then cruelly turned my back on my struggling parents who had sacrificed everything to raise me. My first instinct was panic. This kind of publicity could damage quantum analytics, could undermine investor confidence, could hurt the employees who depended on me. But then Ethan squeezed my hand and said, "We're going to handle this the right way. Not by hiding or defending, but by exposing the truth. It's time the world knew who the Sterlings really are." He was right. I'd spent 10 years running from my past, building my future in secret. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. I called my head of communications and my legal team into an emergency meeting. I also called Maria, who arrived within the hour, ready to go to war on my behalf. For the next 6 hours, we strategized. We pulled every piece of evidence I'd photographed from my grandparents' trust documents. We compiled financial records showing quantum analytics' growth trajectory. We prepared statements from colleagues and friends who could testify to my character. And then we waited to see what the Sterlings' next move would be. We didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, the Sterling family held their own press conference on the steps of their attorney's office. Eleanor stood there in pearls and a demure navy suit, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Arthur looked distinguished and wounded in his white doctor's coat. Clearly just coming from the hospital, Sarah stood between them, playing the role of devoted daughter and concerned sister. Arthur spoke first, his voice shaking with manufactured emotion. "My daughter Celeste and I have had our differences, but I never imagined she would abandon her family so completely. Her stepmother Eleanor has been nothing but loving and supportive, treating Celeste as her own. We sacrificed so much to give her opportunities, and now that she's successful, she's turned her back on us entirely. It's heartbreaking. We're here today to announce that we're filing a lawsuit seeking $5 million in parental support under New York's filial responsibility laws. We simply want our daughter to help care for us in our time of need." The reporters ate it up, shouting questions about how it felt to be abandoned by a wealthy child, whether they thought I owed them money. What kind of daughter would be so cruel? Eleanor played her part perfectly, talking about how she'd loved me like her own, how she'd tried so hard to reach out to me, how devastated she was by my coldness. Sarah added her own tearful commentary about how I'd always been jealous of her close relationship with our parents and had lashed out by cutting off contact. Watching the press conference from my office, I felt a strange calm wash over me. This was it. This was the moment where I could either let them destroy me with their lies, or I could fight back with the truth. I looked at Ethan, at Maria, at my communications director, Rebecca, and I said, "Let's do it. Set up a press conference for Monday morning. It's time to tell my story." That weekend was a whirlwind of preparation, but it was also when two unexpected allies emerged. The first was Julian Blackwood, Sera fiancé. He showed up at my office on Saturday afternoon, looking uncomfortable but determined. He introduced himself awkwardly, apologizing for the intrusion. "Ms. Vance, I need to talk to you about Sarah and your family. I think there are things you should know, and things the public should know too, over the next 2 hours." Julian laid out a devastating picture of life with Sarah Sterling. He'd been dating her for 3 years, having met her at a charity event where she'd presented herself as a successful marketing executive with degrees from NYU and Columbia. In reality, she'd barely graduated from a community college and had never held a job for more than 6 months. She'd been living off money from her parents, who in turn had been living off my father's income, and apparently my trust fund. Julian had discovered the truth 6 months earlier, when he'd hired a private investigator to do a standard background check before proposing. The investigator had uncovered Sarah's lies about her education and employment, and had also stumbled across information about me, the abandoned stepdaughter who'd actually achieved everything Sarah pretended to have accomplished. Julian had confronted Sarah, who'd broken down and confessed that she'd been lying about nearly every aspect of her life. She'd begged him to keep her secret, promised to change, and convinced him that I was the real problem, the jealous stepsister who'd always tried to make her look bad. But after seeing me at the gala and watching the press conference, Julian realized he'd been manipulated. "I can't marry someone who's built their entire life on lies," he told me. "And I can't stand by and watch your family destroy you with more lies." I have documents, recordings of conversations with Sarah, where she admits to various fabrications, proof that her LinkedIn profile and resume are completely fraudulent. I want to help you. It's the right thing to do. The second unexpected ally was even more surprising. On Sunday morning, an elderly woman named Margaret Chen called my office and left a message saying she was my grandmother's best friend and the co-trustee of my educational fund. When I called her back, she started crying. "Celeste, I've been trying to find you for 10 years. Your grandmother would be so proud of who you've become, and so heartbroken about what Arthur and that awful woman did to you." Margaret explained that she'd been the co-trustee of my fund along with my father, but she'd stepped down when my grandparents died because Arthur had assured her he would manage it, according to their wishes. She tried to check in periodically, but Arthur had always brushed her off, saying I was doing fine and was happily attending college. It wasn't until she'd seen the gala photo and done some digging that she'd realized I'd disappeared and the trust fund had been completely drained. "But here's the thing, Celeste," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I have all the original documents, the trust agreement, your grandparents' will, the letters of instruction they wrote to Arthur about how the money was to be used specifically for your higher education at a 4-year university and medical school. I have copies of every disbursement, and I have documentation showing that I objected multiple times to Arthur's questionable spending patterns before I resigned. If you're going to fight them, you need these documents." Margaret came to my office within the hour, carrying a leather folder that smelled of old paper and memories. Inside were 10 years of meticulously kept records, including correspondence where she'd questioned Arthur about specific trust disbursements, and he'd sent her dismissive responses full of medical jargon and condescension. There were copies of the original trust documents that explicitly stated the money could only be used for my educational expenses at accredited 4-year universities and medical schools. And there was a handwritten letter from my grandmother, dated just 2 weeks before she died, outlining her exact wishes for my future and her concerns about Eleanor's influence over Arthur. Reading my grandmother's letter, written in her elegant cursive, I broke down for the first time since the gala. "My darling Celeste," she'd written, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone. But I want you to know that I believe in you with all my heart. You are brilliant, compassionate, and strong. Your grandfather and I have made sure you'll have the means to become the doctor you dream of being. Trust in yourself, work hard, and never let anyone convince you that you're less than extraordinary. We love you forever." I clutched that letter to my chest and cried for the grandparents I'd lost. For the girl I'd been, and for the decade of pain that could have been avoided if only someone had fought for me sooner. But I wasn't that helpless girl anymore. I was Celeste Vance, CEO, wife, warrior. And on Monday morning, I was ready to go to battle. We held the press conference at our corporate headquarters, in a sleek conference room overlooking Manhattan. I wore my favorite Armani suit, sapphire blue with clean lines and subtle power. Ethan sat beside me, along with Rebecca, my attorney Daniel Park, Margaret Chen, and Julian Blackwood. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious employees from neighboring offices. I started by thanking everyone for coming, and then I looked directly into the main camera and began to speak. My name is Celeste Vance, and I'm here today to address the accusations made against me by Arthur, Eleanor, and Sarah Sterling. But more importantly, I'm here to tell you the truth about my childhood, my family, and how I survived their years of emotional, psychological, and financial abuse to become the person I am today. For the next 45 minutes, I laid out everything. I showed slides featuring the trust documents, highlighting the explicit language about educational use only. I displayed records of disbursements that went toward Sarah's parties, clothes, and tutoring, with dates and amounts clearly visible. I presented Margaret's correspondence showing her objections to Arthur's spending. I showed Julian's verification of Sarah's fraudulent credentials, and I shared carefully selected personal stories, not to garner sympathy, but to provide context for why I'd been forced to leave home and build my life from nothing. I described being treated as household help, while Sarah was pampered. I showed photos from social media of Sarah in her $3,000 prom dress, captioned, "Thanks to the best parents ever," posted on the same day. My trust fund showed a withdrawal for that exact amount. I explained how I'd been pushed toward community college, while my acceptance letters to Ivy League schools gathered dust. And I revealed that in the 10 years since I'd left home, my father had called me exactly twice and never once apologized or acknowledged his role in stealing my future. The room was absolutely silent as I spoke, and I could see some of the reporters furiously taking notes, while others just stared in shocked disbelief. When I finished the factual presentation, I paused, took a breath, and addressed the elephant in the room. Now, regarding the $5 million lawsuit and the filial responsibility claim, let me be very clear. Under New York law, filial responsibility requires that adult children support their indigent parents who cannot support themselves. Arthur Sterling is a surgeon who has earned millions of dollars over his career. Eleanor Sterling has never worked a day in her life but lives in luxury. They are not indigent. They are not in need. They are simply greedy. I leaned forward, my voice growing stronger. They are suing me because they see that I've been successful, and they believe they're entitled to profit from the success they tried to prevent. They stole my inheritance. They stole my childhood, and now they want to steal my future again. But I won't let them. Not this time. I have documentation proving embezzlement of trust funds, a crime in New York State. I have evidence of fraud and deception, and I have a dozen witnesses who can testify to the toxic, abusive environment I grew up in. Then I delivered the final blow. However, I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in closure. So here's what I'm offering. If Arthur, Eleanor, and Sarah Sterling withdraw their lawsuit, issue a public apology, and agree to a permanent restraining order barring them from contacting me or anyone associated with my company, I will not press criminal charges for embezzlement, but if they continue with this lawsuit, I will pursue every legal avenue available to me. And I will make sure the entire world knows exactly who they are and what they've done. The choice is theirs. They have 48 hours to decide. The questions that followed were intense, but I handled each one with calm precision. Yes, I had considered criminal charges initially. No, I didn't hate my father. I just had no relationship with him. Yes, I had built quantum analytics entirely on my own merit. No, Ethan's money had nothing to do with my success. I'd become a millionaire before I ever met him. And yes, I hoped that by speaking out, I might help other people who'd experienced similar family betrayal to know they weren't alone and that they could survive and thrive. As the press conference wrapped up, Margaret Chen asked to say a few words. She stood, this elegant 80-year-old woman with steel in her spine, and addressed the cameras directly. I knew Celeste's grandparents for 40 years. Thomas and Margaret Robinson were good, decent people who loved their granddaughter more than anything in the world. They entrusted their son Arthur to honor their wishes and protect their granddaughter's future. He failed in every possible way. If they could see what Arthur and his wife did to Celeste, and if they could see the remarkable woman she's become despite their betrayal, they would be heartbroken by the first and immensely proud of the second. Celeste, your grandparents are watching over you. And they're smiling. Julian also spoke briefly, explaining his decision to come forward. I was engaged to Sarah Sterling under false pretenses. She lied about her education, her career, her values, and her family. When I discovered the truth about how she and her parents treated Celeste, I knew I couldn't be part of that family. Sometimes standing up for what's right means walking away from what's comfortable. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to help set the record straight. The press conference went viral within hours. The video was shared millions of times across social media. The tide of public opinion turned dramatically in my favor. Hashtags like Justice for Celeste and Trust Fund Theft started trending. Legal analysts praised my restraint in offering a settlement rather than immediately pressing charges. Business journalists wrote glowing profiles about my entrepreneurial journey. And most importantly, hundreds of people reached out to share their own stories of family betrayal and financial abuse, thanking me for giving voice to an often hidden form of trauma. The Sterling family's response was swift and desperate. Within 24 hours, their attorney released a statement saying they were withdrawing the lawsuit and wished me well in all my future endeavors. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a terse legal notice of dismissal. But the court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. Arthur Sterling's medical practice was flooded with negative reviews and calls for investigation into his conduct. Eleanor Sterling was quietly asked to resign from the various charity boards she'd used to boost her social status, and Sarah Sterling became a social pariah. Her fraudulent credentials exposed in detail by investigative journalists who'd picked up the story, but I wanted more than just their public humiliation. I wanted legal closure and protection. My attorney Daniel filed for a comprehensive restraining order requiring that Arthur, Eleanor, and Sarah Sterling maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from me. Ethan, our home, and quantum analytics offices, they were barred from all contact, direct or indirect, including through third parties or social media. The order was granted within a week. Given the documented history of harassment and the recent threatening messages, there was, however, one final confrontation, mandated by the court as part of the restraining order proceedings. We all had to appear before a judge for a formal hearing where both sides could present their case. I walked into that courtroom with my legal team, Ethan by my side, and complete confidence in my position. The Sterlings walked in looking like they'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. Arthur's face was gaunt, his white coat replaced by an ill-fitting suit. Eleanor's designer clothes looked dated and slightly worn, as if they'd been pulled from the back of a closet. And Sarah, once so vibrant and cruel, looked diminished, hunched, defeated. Their attorney was a nervous young man who clearly knew he was fighting a losing battle. The judge, Honorable Patricia Whitfield, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd clearly read every document in the case. She listened patiently as the Sterling's attorney made a half-hearted attempt to paint his clients as misunderstood parents who'd only wanted the best for me. Then she invited my attorney to present our case. Daniel was brilliant. He walked the judge through every piece of evidence, every lie, every theft, every moment of cruelty, and he did it with such precision that by the end, even the court reporter looked disgusted. When he finished, Judge Whitfield removed her glasses and addressed the Sterling family directly. I've been on the bench for 22 years, and I've seen a lot of family disputes, but I have rarely seen a case quite as clear-cut as this one. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, you were entrusted with a sacred responsibility to care for and protect a child who had lost her mother and grandparents. Instead, you exploited her, stole from her, and discarded her when she was no longer useful to you. The evidence of embezzlement is overwhelming. The evidence of emotional abuse is compelling. And your recent attempt to extort money from her through spurious legal claims is simply the final insult in a long line of offenses. Arthur started to speak, but the judge held up her hand. "I'm not finished. Ms. Vance, I want to commend you for your remarkable restraint, and for your offer not to press criminal charges in exchange for peace and distance. That demonstrates a level of maturity and grace that your father and stepmother have never shown. Therefore, I'm granting the permanent restraining order as requested. Furthermore, I'm ordering that this order and the factual basis for it be made part of the public record, so that there can be no doubt about what transpired in this case." Eleanor started to cry, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. Arthur sat frozen, his jaw clenched. Sierra stared at the floor, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The judge then turned to me. "Ms. Vance, you have demonstrated that the best revenge is indeed living well. You took the worst kind of betrayal and turned it into fuel for extraordinary achievement. I hope you'll continue to thrive and perhaps consider ways to help others who faced similar circumstances. This court is adjourned." As we stood to leave, Arthur finally found his voice. "Celeste, please," had took a step toward me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes that might have been regret. But it was too little, too late, and it was immediately shut down by security, enforcing the restraining order. I looked at him one final time. This man who'd given me life, but then tried to steal my future. And I felt nothing but a profound sense of closure. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting, but I kept my statement brief. Justice has been served. I'm grateful to the court, to my supporters, and to everyone who believed in me. Now I'm going back to work and back to my life. I have a company to run and a future to build. And with that, Ethan and I walked to our car and drove away from the Sterling family forever. The next 6 months were transformative in ways I couldn't have imagined. Quantum Analytics saw a 20% increase in business, partially because of the publicity, but mostly because businesses appreciated a CEO who stood on principle. I was invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship, overcoming adversity, and standing up to toxic family dynamics. Major publications ran feature stories about my journey, and most meaningfully, I received thousands of messages from people who'd experienced similar situations and felt inspired to make changes in their own lives. But Ethan and I decided we wanted to do something more concrete to help. We established the Quantum Analytics Education Fund, a program that would provide 5 full scholarships every year to talented students from abusive or unsupportive family situations. Each scholarship included full tuition and living expenses for 4 years of undergraduate study, plus ongoing mentorship and internship opportunities at Quantum Analytics. The first year we announced the program, we received over 3,000 applications. Reading their stories, seeing my own pain reflected in their words, was both heartbreaking and inspiring. At the scholarship award ceremony, I met a 17-year-old girl named Jasmine who reminded me so much of myself. She'd been working 3 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 gigapascals, desperate to escape her toxic home situation. When I told her she'd been selected for a full scholarship, she burst into tears and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Thank you for believing in me when nobody else does," she whispered. "I'm going to make you proud." I pulled back and looked her in the eyes. "No," I said gently. "You're going to make yourself proud. That's what matters most." As for the Sterling family, I heard through the grapevine that things continued to fall apart for them. Arthur's medical license was suspended, pending investigation into multiple malpractice claims he'd previously settled quietly. The suspension became permanent when the medical board determined he'd been performing procedures while impaired and had falsified patient records. Eleanor, facing the reality of their collapsed financial situation, filed for divorce and moved to Florida to live with her sister. And Sarah, unable to find work or maintain her facade of success, apparently moved back in with Eleanor, working retail jobs and living a life far removed from the luxury she'd once enjoyed. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, but I also felt no sympathy. They'd made their choices, built their house of cards on lies and theft and cruelty. And when the truth came out, that house collapsed exactly as it should have. My grandmother used to say that the truth has a way of emerging, like flowers pushing through concrete. No matter how hard you try to bury it, she was right. 1 year after the gala confrontation, I received an unexpected piece of mail. It was a letter from my father, forwarded through his attorney to comply with the restraining order. I almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten on plain notebook paper, not his usual expensive stationery. Celeste, it began. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. I failed you as a father in every way possible. I allowed Eleanor to poison my relationship with you. I stole your inheritance to fund a lifestyle and cover up my own mistakes. I chose my own comfort over your well-being. These are facts I have to live with for the rest of my life. I've lost my career, my reputation, my marriage, and most importantly, my daughter. I deserve all of that and more. You've become an extraordinary person despite me. Not because of me. Your grandparents would be so proud. I'm proud too, though I have no right to be. I hope you have a wonderful life. Celeste, you've earned it. Arthur. I read the letter 3 times, waiting to feel something. Anger, sadness, vindication, anything. But all I felt was a distant, neutral acknowledgement that he'd finally told the truth. Even if it came too late to matter, I folded the letter carefully, put it in a folder with all the other documents from that painful chapter of my life, and stored it away. Maybe someday I'd want to revisit it. Maybe not. But either way, I was free, standing on the balcony of our penthouse apartment that evening, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. I thought about the journey I'd been on, from that scared 18-year-old girl with a backpack and a handful of cash to the woman I'd become, confident, successful, loved, and at peace. Ethan came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "I'm thinking about how some people come into our lives to teach us how to be, and some people come into our lives to teach us how not to be," I said slowly. "My grandparents taught me the first lesson. The Sterlings taught me the second, and I'm grateful for both, even though one hurt so much more than the other." Ethan kissed the top of my head. "You know what you taught me," he murmured. "That strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, dusting yourself off, and building something beautiful from the broken pieces. You're the strongest person I've ever known." As the sun set over New York City, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I realized that I'd spent so many years running from my past, trying to prove I was worthy, trying to become someone my father would be proud of. But I didn't need his pride anymore. I had my own pride, earned through hard work and perseverance. I had my own family, chosen and built on love and respect. I had my own success, achieved through merit and determination. And I had my own peace, found by setting boundaries and refusing to accept less than I deserved. The Sterling family had tried to break me, to convince me I was worthless, to steal my future and leave me with nothing. Instead, they'd given me the greatest gift possible, the absolute certainty that I could survive anything, that I could take the worst kind of betrayal and turn it into fuel for achievement, that I could stand on my own 2 feet and build an empire from scratch, that I didn't need anyone's permission or approval to be extraordinary. So here's what I want you to understand if you're listening to this story and seeing yourself in it, if you're stuck in a toxic relationship, whether it's with family, a partner, or friends. If someone is taking advantage of your kindness, your money, your time, your energy, if you're sacrificing your dreams to make someone else's dreams come true while they give you nothing in return, you deserve better. You are worth more. You have the power to walk away and build something beautiful, even if it's hard, even if it's scary, even if everyone tells you you're wrong. It took me losing everything to find myself. It took me being thrown away like garbage to realize I was actually a treasure. It took me having my future stolen to learn that I could create my own future, better and brighter than anything anyone else could have given me. And if I could do it, starting with $4,000 and a phone full of copied documents, then you can do it too. The people who truly love you will support your growth. The people who truly value you will respect your boundaries. The people who truly care about you will want you to succeed. Anyone who tries to hold you back, anyone who makes you feel small, anyone who takes from you without giving anything meaningful in return, those people are showing you exactly who they are. Believe them, and then have the courage to walk away. My grandmother used to tell me that some flowers need to be transplanted into better soil in order to bloom. That's what I did. I pulled myself out of toxic soil and replanted myself somewhere I could grow. It was painful. The roots hurt when they're torn up. But the blooming, oh, the blooming was worth every moment of pain. So let me ask you, are you stuck in toxic soil? Are there people in your life who are draining your nutrients and blocking your sunlight? What would it take for you to transplant yourself into better conditions? Think about that. And if this story resonated with you, if you've experienced something similar, or if you're going through it right now, drop a comment below and share your story. Let's create a community of people who've chosen to bloom despite the toxic soil they started in. Hit that like button if this message spoke to your heart. Subscribe so you don't miss future stories. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Remember, you're not alone. You're not crazy. And you're not ungrateful for wanting better. You're brave. You're worthy. And you're capable of creating the life you deserve. Until next time, keep growing, keep blooming, and keep believing in your own worth. Because you are extraordinary. Even if the people around you can't see it yet, sometimes you have to save yourself. And that's exactly what I did.